Thank you very much, Ron. Thank you also very much to the organizers for inviting me to this very interesting conference in a beautiful place despite the wind. So I want to talk about some joint work which I have done recently together with Matteo Seminarotti. Matteo was a PhD student at CWI and he defended a few months ago. So the topic is about a class of structured matrices, the so-called Robinson or Robinsonian matrices, which I will introduce, of course, in a little while. So it's a class of structured matrices, and they arise naturally in the so-called seriation problem, which is a ranking or a sequencing problem, which takes its origin in archaeology, as I will recall in a little while. So what I want to do first is to introduce the problem, the class of matrices, and the first algorithm which was introduced for checking, so for recognizing whether a matrix has this nice structure, which is a numerical algorithm based on eigenvalues, so the spectral algorithm. And after that, I want to move to a more combinatorial part, so explain properties of these matrices which enable to have other recognition algorithms which are purely combinatorial. So part of them are based on links with interval graphs or hypergraphs. And the last part of the talk will be based on, so this is really the stuff I've been doing recently with Matteo. So this is based on a link with unit interval graphs, which allow a much simpler recognition algorithm, which will be just based on a graph search, like lexicographic breadth-first search. And a generalization of it, which we introduced for matrices, or if you like, for weighted graphs, which we call similarity-first search. So this is, oh, sorry, okay. Okay, let's get started. So the seriation problem, what is it? So as I just said, this is a problem which takes its roots in archaeology. So Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie was a famous British archaeologist at the end of the 19th century. He made very important discoveries in Egypt and later also in Palestine. And what he became famous for, so he found he discovered a lot of archaeological sites, but what he became famous for was his scientific approach to analyzing and exploiting the information he found in the archaeological sites. So at that time, of course, there was no absolute dating, there was no carbon-14. But what Petrie did is he wanted to sequence chronologically, so find the relative order, sequencing order of the graves, for instance. And this he would do by looking at what he found in the tombs, in the graves, like for instance potteries. So the idea is, just like with clothing today, you have a certain type of clothes which becomes into fashion, then it stays on the market, and then it disappears again, it goes out of fashion. And his idea is that to apply this principle also for the potteries. So potteries at some point in time would become into fashion, and then you would find them in the tombs, and then they would stay, and after some while they would disappear again. So his idea is to order the graves chronologically based on stylistic and technical characteristics of objects like potteries found in the graves. So then you can make a 0-1 matrix, which is the rows are indexed by the graves, the columns by the potteries, and you would put a 1 if pottery of type I is found in the given grave. And then the idea is that you want to order the graves in such a way that in every column, which corresponds to a type of pottery, you would find the ones coming consecutively. So, because then it means pottery comes into fashion, stays, and then disappears again. So his sequencing approach is based on, you have a 0-1 matrix and you try to find out, reorder the rows in such a way that you bring it in this, so that the columns have this consecutive ones property. So this was the idea of Petrie, and this is why the matrix on the right with this nice shape is called the Petrie matrix. So here is pictures which are taken from his original paper published in 1899. Later, another archaeologist, Robinson, an American archaeologist, in 1951 introduced a new idea to do sequence dating. So his idea was now, you have the graves, and let's try to figure out some number, some similarity between two graves. So he came up with a method for defining some similarity characteristic between pairwise pairs of graves. And then so suppose you came up with this similarity matrix, whose entries give you the pairwise correlation between the graves. Then the idea is to find a reordering of the matrix, of the rows and columns, the same for the rows and the same for the columns, in such a way that if two graves have a high similarity, they should come close in the order. So for instance, on the left, we would have a matrix. This would be the similarity matrix. Of course, I made it up, huh? But suppose you have this similarity matrix between the pairs of graves, and on the right, it is reordered in such a way that if two graves have a high similarity, they are close in the ordering. So like grave 5 has a higher similarity 3 to grave 2 than to grave 4. So grave 2 is closer to 5 than grave 4. So the matrix on the right, having such a shape, such a matrix is called the Robinson matrix. I will define again in the next slide. And the problem is you have an unordered matrix on the left, and you want to reorder symmetrically the rows and the columns in order to bring it to a shape like on the right. So I have introduced two ways of doing sequence dating, and actually there is a link between both. The second one contains the first one is a special case. There is this result of Kendall, which says that if you have a 0-1 matrix P, it's a Petri matrix if and only if PP transpose is Robinson. And more generally now, if you have an arbitrary matrix P, not necessarily binary, it has unimodal columns if and only if some matrix which you can build out of it is Robinson. So the problem of testing whether a matrix is Robinsonian contains as a special case the problem of testing whether a matrix has a consecutive ones property. Okay, so let's maybe redefine what is a Robinson matrix, because this is the main player in the whole talk. So let's make sure that we know what is a Robinson similarity matrix. So if you have a symmetric matrix A, we say it's a Robinson similarity if the entries grow monotonically increasing when you move on a row towards the diagonal or when you move on a column towards the diagonal. So this is a heat map of what a Robinson matrix should look like. Large entries are close to the diagonal, and as you move away, the entries decrease. In mathematical terms, if you have 3 indices x, y, z in that order, the entry xz should be at most the entry xy and at most the entry yz. So this is a 3-point condition which defines when do you say that the matrix is Robinson. So this is very easy to check if a matrix is Robinson. Just check all triples. But now, what the interesting problem is now you have a matrix which is disordered like this. It's crumbled. And the question is, can you find a permutation having the property that if you reorder the rows and the columns using that permutation, you find a nice matrix having this shape. So this is a scrambled matrix, and this is a reordered matrix. And this is what okay, if you have such a permutation, then you say that it's a Robinson ordering of the matrix. Of course, not every matrix admits such a Robinson ordering. But if it admits one, then you say that it's Robinsonian, and all the orders reordering the matrix are called Robinson orderings. And the seriation problem, at least in the form I will discuss it today, is asking, check whether there is a Robinson ordering, find it, or otherwise decide that you cannot find any such ordering. In other words, the matrix is not Robinsonian. So this is the notion of Robinson similarity. Actually, in the literature, there is kind of 2 parallel literatures which took place, one in terms of similarities and the other one in terms of dissimilarities. So it's how you look at things. Huh? Either you want to look at high similarities or you want to look at high dissimilarities. These are the two faces of the same thing. But it's yet useful to just look at that other way of looking at things. So a distance matrix, D, is a Robinson dissimilarity precisely when it has the other property. So that the entries are low along the diagonal and they increase when you move away from the diagonal. In the same way, you have what is a Robinsonian dissimilarity. And of course, D is a Robinsonian dissimilarity precisely when minus D is a Robinsonian similarity. So these are exactly the two same things, but it's useful to have both pictures in mind. So the seriation problem, just repeat it, is given a matrix A, symmetric, you want to check whether you can find a permutation pi, which reorders the matrix as a Robinson matrix. And it has many applications. I just mentioned archaeology, but it has many other applications. So there is one way which one could take to approach this problem, which would be optimization approach. Let's try to figure out some criterion that you try to minimize, and with the idea that minimizing this criterion is going to do what you want, trying to find the matrix, permutation pi. So here's a possible optimization approach via quadratic assignment. So let's introduce a matrix, dissimilarity matrix D, whose entries are just given by x minus y square, for instance. And then let's look at this problem when you were to find a permutation pi, minimizing this objective function. So look, if the entry of A is large, you want D to be small. So you want pi of x and pi of y to be close by. So this objective is exactly at least capturing what you are trying to do. Order indices which have a high similarity, try to put them close to each other in the order. You can figure out, and many other optimization criteria have been introduced. But a reason for looking at this optimization criteria is that it will introduce in a nice way the spectral algorithm which I want to discuss next. So this optimization problem for an arbitrary matrix A is an NP-complete problem. So it's a nice way to try it, but it's an NP-complete problem. On the other hand, what we could show together with Matteo is that if you assume that matrix A has a Robinsonian structure, then it turns out to be polynomial time solvable. And finding a Robinson ordering is exactly going to give you an optimal solution of this optimization problem. So maybe let me discuss this. So let's maybe observe here this D, which I've chosen here. What is its property? It's Robinson dissimilarity, because you have small entries when x is y and when x and y get far apart. So it's very easy to see that this is a Robinson dissimilarity. And on top of that, it's a Toeplitz matrix. So the entries have all the same entries in any given band parallel to the main diagonal. So it's a Toeplitz Robinson dissimilarity. So if the matrix A is a Robinson similarity, and if D is a Robinson dissimilarity, which is Toeplitz, or actually if A would be Toeplitz, that would be fine also, then in this case, this instance of the quadratic assignment problem is polynomial time solvable. And actually, the identity permutation gives the optimum solution. So if this instance of quadratic assignment is polynomial time solvable when the two matrices have this Robinson structure. And if they would be Robinsonian, then you could find the Robinson orderings, and again, you would find the optimum solution. And actually, this contains a very special case when the matrix A would have this very simple block structure. So this is a very, it's of course Robinson similarity. And when D was like this, and this was proven in this paper, and this was actually the whole motivation for our work to look at this question. So let me now take again this, what I want to do now is to explain you a numerical algorithm. You have a matrix A, and you want to check whether this matrix A is a Robinson matrix. And there is an algorithm which was introduced in '98 by Atkins et co-authors, which is now known as the spectral method. And the motivation for this algorithm comes, we can explain at least where it comes from by looking again at this formulation of via the two-sum problem, so via quadratic assignment. So the two-sum formulation which I just explained was given over there. So the first idea is let's relax it. So here it's a minimization of a permutation pi. So let's relax it in the sense that instead of having this pi x minus pi y, we're now going to have a vector v, and we replace pi x by the coordinates of v. Yeah, we do this. And now if you look at this quantity here, you can rewrite it as a quadratic form which involves the Laplacian matrix of the graph. Well, if I do this minimization thing here, okay, I forgot to say that we can always assume that the matrix is non-negative. Let's assume this throughout the whole talk, because if you have a similarity matrix which is not non-negative, you just add up a big constant to all the entries, and checking Robinsonian is all the same. So translating your matrix by a multiple of the all one matrix doesn't change anything in the problem. So for simplicity, we always assume now that the matrix is non-negative. So then the Laplacian matrix is a PSD matrix, it's a positive semi-definite. So this minimization problem has the minimum is equal to 0 when you take for v, for instance, the 0 vector, or when you take for v the all ones vector. So the smallest eigenvalue of the Laplacian is equal to 0 with eigenvector, the all one vector. So to make it a bit more interesting, this optimization problem, we add that v should not be non-zero, so we scale it, norm 1, and it should be orthogonal to the all one vector. And then what do we end up? This optimization problem here is exactly computing the second eigenvalue of the Laplacian, which is known as the Fiedler value, and the corresponding eigenvectors are called the Fiedler eigenvectors. Okay, so why should there be something to do between a Fiedler value, Fiedler eigenvector, and Robinson ordering? If you have if your matrix A would be a Robinsonian matrix. And the very nice result that Atkins, Bowman, and Hendrickson proved is that there is something to do between Robinson orderings and the Fiedler eigenvector. So the first result which they show is that if you have a Robinson matrix A, you look at the Laplacian matrix, which I defined here, then this Laplacian matrix has at least one Fiedler eigenvector which is monotone. So if your matrix is Robinson, it means that the natural ordering of the rows of the columns is already a Robinson ordering of the matrix. And what this result is saying is that this natural ordering is actually ordering one of the Fiedler vectors. So one of the Robinson orderings, you find it by looking at one Fiedler vector. So there is something to do between the Robinson orderings and the Fiedler eigenvectors. But there is immediately a difficulty with this. I mean, it's not immediately clear how to use it to recover the Robinson orderings, because maybe your second eigenvalue has multiplicity more than one, and then you don't know which is the other Fiedler vector you should look at. But they took care of this, and this is in the second item. So assume your matrix is irreducible, and this is without loss of generality, because if the matrix is reducible, then you just treat the blocks separately. So without loss of generality, the matrix is irreducible. And assume that the smallest entry is equal to 0, which is also very easy to realize, otherwise you just shift the matrix by the suitable multiple of the all one matrix. So if the matrix is irreducible and the smallest entry is equal to 0, and if it is Robinsonian, then the second eigenvalue is strictly positive, and it is simple. So now we are at home because there is only one Fiedler eigenvector. So now it would make sense to say we are going to order the Fiedler vector, and this is going to give us the Robinson ordering, or Robinson ordering. It's okay, assuming that there is no ambiguity, because if the Fiedler vector has repeated entries, then again you have some ambiguity. But if the Fiedler vector has no repeated entries, then indeed a permutation reorders the Fiedler vector monotonically if and only if it is a Robinson ordering of the matrix. So if you're lucky that the fiddler vector has no repeated entries, just order it, and this order gives you the Robinson ordering you are looking for. And what if there are repeated entries? Well, then you choose just recurse. So you recurse the algorithm on the submatrix indexed by the repeated entries. So this is, in a nutshell, the spectral algorithm to recognize Robinsonian matrices, which, roughly speaking, compute the second eigenvalue, corresponding second eigenvector, and order the eigenvector, and this gives you the Robinson orderings. And moreover, you can encode all Robinson orderings using the data structure of PQ trees. So this is a very nice algorithm, but we are combinatorialists, and when we see such an algorithm, at least I immediately ask myself, is it possible to do this in a purely combinatorial way? And it's possible, and there was already several algorithms which were known before we started our work, and this is what I want first to tell you briefly is the links. So the algorithm rely on links to interval graphs and hypergraphs, and then we will move on to the link with unit interval graphs. So an old classic result is due to Mirkin and Rodin, which characterize when is the matrix Robinsonian in terms of the so-called Ball hypergraph of the matrix. So if you have a similarity matrix A, so what we can do is look at what are the balls. And to get a ball, what you do is you pick an index x, a scalar delta, and then the corresponding ball will be all the indices y whose similarity to x is at least the threshold delta. So in this way, you can enumerate all the balls. You get the list of balls. And the claim is that A is a Robinsonian similarity precisely when the ball hypergraph is an interval hypergraph. And by definition, what does it mean? It means that, so what you do is you make the incidence matrix, where the rows are the vertices, and the columns are the hyperedges, and so you make this incidence matrix, and this incidence matrix should have the consecutive ones property. There's another equivalent characterization in terms of the ball intersection graph. So now, the balls are the vertices, and you put an edge between two balls if they intersect. So this is the intersection graph of the balls. And the characterization is that this intersection graph should be an interval graph. And again, you can check this by checking that a certain incidence matrix has a consecutive ones property. So, checking whether the matrix is Robinsonian you reduce it to a problem of checking whether a certain matrix has the consecutive ones property. And checking whether the consecutive ones property holds is with a linear time algorithm due to Booth and Luker based on PQ trees, which is linear in the number of rows, columns, and non-zero entries in the matrix. So in a sense, the problem is solved with this. But it's nice, but not totally. You would hope some algorithm which, so it involves the balls. You would have to enumerate, of course, the number of balls is polynomial, but you have to involve all the balls, and you would like to have another algorithm which more directly works on the matrix. But first, let me show in this table what are the existing algorithms which exist for checking Robinsonian matrices. So the first ones are all based on these links. The first three are based on these links with interval hypergraphs and graphs. And here are the complexities, first n to the fourth and cube, and then n square. So the last algorithm by Préa and Fortin is n square. So it's an optimal algorithm, because you should read the matrix. So in a sense, they solve the problem in a very nice way. Yeah. But the algorithm is very technically complicated. It's very difficult to follow. And none of these algorithms has been implemented. Then we have Atkins algorithms, which is a spectral algorithm, which is numerical and based on eigenvalues, which is also very nice. And so what we did actually is we wanted to find a combinatorial algorithm which is simple conceptually and to implement. And this is what we have done. We have two algorithms, and I will actually only focus on the second one. It will be, the complexity is slightly worse than the optimal one, but it's extremely simple to understand, to state, and to implement. So I think this simplicity has also its value. And it's actually comparable in practice with the spectral algorithm. And actually for large, dense matrices, it is much better than the spectral algorithm. Okay, so now we have to move on to the other type of algorithm. We have to move to the link with unit interval graphs. And this is really the most natural, this is where the link is much more natural, the combinatorial link. So the observation was made already long ago by Roberts, who observed that if you have a 0-1 matrix, it is Robinsonian precisely when it is the adjacency matrix of a unit interval graph. So 0-1 Robinsonian matrices are nothing but unit interval graphs. So maybe what is a unit interval graph? It's a graph whose nodes are labeled by intervals, and you have an edge if the intervals intersect. So here is a set of intervals and the corresponding unit interval graph. And in order to see why Roberts' observation holds, we just need to use this characterization of unit interval graph. A graph is a unit interval graph precisely when it admits an ordering of the nodes which satisfies this 3-point condition. So this condition says that if you have 3 vertices, x, y, z, in that order, if xz is an edge, then xy and yz should be edges. And now if we put back what was the definition of a Robinson matrix, then these two conditions are the same. Because the condition was if x is less than y and less than z, then the entry xz should be at most x, y, and xz. So if xz is an edge, it's equal to 1, then x, y, and yz should be also equal to 1, so they should be edges. So this Robinson property is a matrix analog of this 3-point condition for a graph. And from this follows immediately that a matrix 0,1 is Robinsonian if and only if it is adjacency matrix of a unit interval graph. And now this opens up another direction to find recognition algorithm, because there are very nice recognition algorithm for unit interval graphs based on lexicographic breadth first search. So this is a three-sweep, an algorithm of Cornell in 2004. Using LexBFS, you can recognize if a graph is unit interval graph in linear time. So what I want now to do is, before I will describe what is Cornell algorithm, but let me just, you all know it, but let me just go in some detail what is LexBFS, because then I'm going to tell you how to extend LexBFS, which works for graph, how to extend it to work with weighted graph or matrices. So, very quick, what is graph search? Well, graph search, you have a graph and you want to traverse the vertices of the graph in a certain order. So a graph search, by definition, is going to deliver you an ordering of the vertices. And the whole thing is, what is the strategy you follow to decide how you traverse the vertices? So usually you have three kinds of vertices. You have the vertices which have been visited, those which have not yet been visited, and you have the current vertices which you are sitting on, which is usually called the pivot. So say we start at 1. So now 1 is visited, so Q is the Q. So Q contains the vertices which have not yet been visited. So you visit 1, Q leaves the Q. Now the Q is the remaining 5 vertices. Say you visit 2, 2 becomes visited, it leaves the Q, and so on. And at the end, the Q is finished, and we have obtained so this is a very high level, but of course you should decide how you update the Q. How do you choose the next vertex to visit? So how do you choose the next pivot? And how do you update the Q? So there are several ways to do it, and let me just concentrate on how LexBFS does it. So LexBFS is going, so there is a queue of unvisited vertices, which is So the best, I mean, one possible way to describe LexBFS is in terms of partition refinement. It's very pictorially, very easy to grasp how this works. So this, the Q, sorry. Here is the queue of unvisited vertices, which is partitioned. So it's given by an ordered partition. Here are 3 blocks, B1, B2, B3. And these 3 blocks have been created by the priorities which have been imposed by the previously visited vertices. So suppose this is a standoff affair when at some step in your algorithm, and you just now want to say how are you going to update the queue and how you're going to choose your next pivot. So if P is the current pivot, the vertex you're currently visiting, you look at the neighborhood of the current pivot P, N of P. So these are the red nodes, X1 and X3 and X6. And the strategy is that these are the nodes that you are going to visit next. So you pull the neighbors of the pivot, you pull them forward. So which means that block B1 gets split into 2 blocks, where the neighbors comes first, and the non-neighbors comes next. Same thing for B2, first the neighbors, where there is nobody, so it's empty, and then the non-neighbor. For B3, the same. So X6 is a neighbor, so it comes first, and X5 is not a neighbor, so it comes next. And then you delete the blocks which are empty, so this is the next queue. So, and then the next step to choose a pivot will be to pick vertices in the first block of the queue. And here you may have ties if the block has size more than 2. And you may use several strategies to decide on how do you pick up the pivot, the next pivot in the slice of the first block of the queue. And in LexBFS, you just pick any vertex you like in the first block. And in the version LexBFS Plus, what you do is you fix at the very beginning some reference order, which you use to order the vertices inside the blocks. So you would have a reference order, and then you say in the first block between X1 and X3, I'm going to pick up the node which comes first in that reference order. So LexBFS is a very simple algorithm which runs in linear time in the number of nodes and vertices. So here is a small example. So this is a graph, and here tau is my reference order, so natural order 1 up to 6. So the first queue is everybody, so then the first pivot should be the first vertex of tau, so this is 1. And now I split the queue depending on the adjacency. So 1 is adjacent to 2 and 3, so this is the first block, and the rest. So the next pivot, I should choose a vertex in the first block between 2 and 3, and I pick the one which is first in tau, so that's 2. So the next pivot is 2. And when I pick 2 as a pivot, I should split the blocks. Here also I have 4, 5, 6. I should split it depending on the adjacency to 2. So 2 is adjacent to 4 and 5. So this is why 4, 5 gets their own block, and 6 gets next. And so on. So and after we get the LexBFS Plus ordering is this ordering. Okay? So sorry I spent maybe a bit too much time. It's probably well known to all of you, but this is how LexBFS and how LexBFS Plus works. And in a second, I will show you how you just generalize this algorithm to deal with a weighted graph or a matrix. But first, let me describe how Cornell did use this LexBFS algorithm to check whether a graph is a unit interval graph. And what Cornell did is first step, so you have a graph. First step is you do a LexBFS, first round, first sweep LexBFS. You get an order sigma. Second step is you do now a LexBFS Plus round, where as reference order, you use the reverse of the first order sigma. Second round. Third round, you do the same. Again, a LexBFS Plus round, using as reference order the reverse of the previous sweep. Rounds are also called sweeps in this literature. And then you are done. You check whether this order pi satisfies the 3-point condition. If it does, then happy. You found a proof, a certificate that your graph is a unit interval graph. And if it does not, then you can conclude that the graph is not a unit interval graph. And this is where the proof has to go. show correctness of this algorithm, but the algorithm works. So in 3 sweeps of LexBFS, you can recognize whether a graph is a unit interval graph. In other words, you can recognize whether 0,1 matrix is a Robinsonian matrix and find the Robinson ordering. What about general matrices now? There are 2 options. First option would be to observe that an arbitrary Robinson matrix, you can view it actually just as a conic combination of 0,1 Robinson matrices. And then you could get back to using LexBFS with an additional difficulty, which is that you would have to find a 3-point ordering which makes a bunch of graphs at the same time happy. So this would be where the difficulty lies. So this is what we first did, but I don't want to spend time on this. I want to stress the second option, which is let's forget about graphs and LexBFS, let's just immediately generalize the algorithm to the setting of matrices. And this is the so-called similarity first search algorithm, which I now want to discuss. So similarity first search is an extension of LexBFS to matrices or weighted graphs. And it just works the same as LexBFS, but except that now we should take care that we have a matrix. So if you have the current pivot P, now the neighborhood is a set of indices whose similarity to the pivot is strictly positive. So remember, we can assume that the matrix is non-negative. And then we can really talk about, so you have the points which are disconnected to the pivot because the similarity is 0. And the points in the neighborhood are those whose similarity is strictly positive. And now we have more values. In the graph case, you would have here just one value, 1. In the matrix case, you have more values. So what you do is you split the neighborhood into classes depending on the value of the similarity. So in the first bunch, C1, you put everybody with the highest similarity, alpha 1. In the second block, C2, you put everybody with the second highest. In the third block, you put everybody with the third highest, and so on. So now you get a partition of the neighborhood into similarity blocks. So the guys with high similarity come first. And the algorithm will work the same, but now I should explain if we have a queue, how do we update the queue? And we again do partition refinement, but now we do partition refinement by this partition C1, C2, C3. So pick a block, B1. You put B1 intersection the first class C1 first, and B1 intersection C2 second, and B1 intersection C3 third. And you do this for all the blocks. So it's a very simple algorithmic operation to do on the queue. And after that, you get the next queue, which is here. So this is the very analog of what happened in the graph case, except that you are now doing partition refinement by a partition which has more classes than in the graph case. And again, you could, so here the first block has just one element, so there is no tie. But if you would have ties, there is a SFS algorithm where you pick a vertex in the first block at random. And there is a SFS plus version where you have a reference order which you use to decide which node to pick in the first block as the next pivot. And here is the running time for one round of SFS. It's n plus m log n if your matrix has m non-zero entries. So it's the same except this log n term which comes here, which comes because you have to do some ordering of the elements. Because now you have, so this is why this log n term is coming in with respect to the graph case. Maybe just a small example just to show how it works. So here is a weighted graph. So this is my reference order. So I start with 1. So 1 has similarity 2 to 3. So 3 comes first. Similarity 1 to 2. So 2 gets its block. And 4, 5, 6 are 0. So they get together in a block. Then the next pivot becomes 3. And then you should you look at the similarities of 3 with the rest. So 3 has similarity 2 to 6, so this is why 6 gets its own block. 3 has similarity 1 to 5, so 5 gets its own block, and 2, 4 it's 0, so it gets, and you already have a partition into singleton, so you stop your SFS round is already finished. Okay, so here is now the recognition algorithm, which we propose to recognize whether a matrix is Robinsonian. It's going to work like a Cornell algorithm. We are going to do, first we do a first SFS round, find the first ordering sigma 0, and the only thing that the difference is that in the case of graphs, Cornell just needed 3 sweeps. Now for a matrix, you may need n sweeps. So for every I between 1 and n minus 2, the new sweep sigma I is SFS plus, where as reference order you use the reverse of the previous computed sweep, and you iterate. So at a step I, what you do is you check if the current sweep is a Robinson ordering. If yes, then happy. You have found the Robinson ordering, so a proof of your matrix is Robinsonian. If no, you compute the next round. And what you, so the result is that at step, when you have computed the n minus 2 sweep, you are done. Either it's a Robinson ordering and that's a proof of Robinsonian matrix, or if it is not a Robinson ordering, that's a proof that the matrix was not a Robinsonian matrix. So conceptually, the algorithm is very easy. You just do n minus 2 sweeps of SFS. And the running time is n times SFS. So this running time. And there is a simpler test you can do at line 4, but let's not go over it. So the algorithm is very simple conceptually. It's also very simple to implement because it's just partition refinement that you need to implement. But the correctness proof is rather is not so easy. So I will just now try to tell you a few things about a kind of notions which are useful for the correctness proof, just to give you a kind of feeling how would you show such a thing. So you want to make a link between SFS orderings and Robinson ordering. So there is a first link which you can make is to try to understand what are the points which could be the start point of some Robinson ordering. And let's call this an anchor of the matrix. And the first thing which I can tell is, for instance, how to get an anchor. And an anchor, you get it through SFS. So that's already a good sign that SFS is doing something good for you, for your problem. Because at first sight, it's not clear why SFS has anything to do with finding Robinson orderings. So an anchor is a point, is an index which can be the start point of some Robinson orderings. And you say that A is an anchor. If some Robinson ordering exists, which starts or ends at A. Because if pi is a Robinson ordering, then the reverse is also a Robinson ordering. And you say that 2 points are opposite anchors if they are the start and the end of some Robinson ordering, pi. So first result is how to get an anchor. Well, you just run SFS. So the result is if you have a Robinsonian matrix and if sigma is one sweep of A, then the endpoint of sigma, B, is an anchor. So to get an anchor, one round of SFS buys you an anchor. And the second result is if you now start your SFS with an A which is an anchor, and you look at the endpoint, then you know already that B is an anchor. But moreover, you know that A and B are actually opposite anchors. So in 2 rounds of SFS, you have already found 2 opposite anchors. So you know that there is some Robinson ordering starting at A and ending at B. Finding pi is another story, but you know it exists. And the key ingredient which is playing a role is you need to do some work on the combinatorics of the problem. And the combinatorics are going to involve forbidding certain paths in the matrix. But let me, now maybe I want to show you this nice flipping property, because this contains the essence of the proof. So you do sigma 0 is the first sweep, its endpoint is an anchor, A, you have. Then you repeat the next sweep, so sigma 1, which is SFS plus, using the reverse of sigma 0 as reference order. So it starts with an anchor, you know this. It ends with B, which is an anchor, and A, B are opposite anchors that we just saw. You do one more sweep, now it starts with B. And the claim is that it's going to actually end with A. So this is the anchor flipping property. After 2 rounds, starts at A, ends at B, starts at B, ends at A, starts at A, ends at B, and so on. It's going to be always like this, A, B, A, B, A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. But something new happens at sweep 3, which is the next point A1 and the last byte one point B1 start having a very nice property. A1 is going to be actually the last before A in the previous one, so you already know it will be an anchor of the submatrix. And actually what we can show, which is crucial for the induction proof, is that A1 and B1 are going to be opposite anchors of the submatrix where you delete A and B. And you can view the sigma, so the last round of the whole thing. If you delete A and B, you can view the last sigma as the multi-sweep algorithm applied to the matrix where you have deleted A and B. And this will be the key to the induction proof. But going there is quite a lot of technical details. But this is the essence of the proof. Okay. Maybe one concept which I want to show you is this very simple concept, but which is crucial throughout the whole thing. And this is the notion of path avoiding between 2 points, avoiding a third point. So I didn't say, but many of these concepts can be seen as analog of what was used in the graph case, but with some adaptation. So if you have 2 points x and y, a path from x to y avoiding a third point z is just a sequence of points, v0, v1, vk. And you say that it avoids z if look at every triple, vi plus 1, and you plug in z in the middle. And you say that the path avoids z if every such triple is not Robinson. So every such triple is violating the conditions which you want to have. You would like to have an at most, and it's a strict bigger. So every such triple is not Robinson. That's the definition. Why is such a definition useful? And here is a very trivial observation which follows from the definitions. If you have a path from x to y avoiding z, then if you pick any Robinson ordering, z cannot be between x and y. So if there is a path from x to y avoiding somebody else, that somebody else has to be outside of x and y in any Robinson ordering. And so, for instance, this permits to give combinatorial characterizations for anchors and for opposite anchors. Let's just maybe look at just at the last one. Suppose you have 2 anchors which are opposite anchors. So it means that you have a Robinson ordering starting at A and ending at B. And then it follows that you could not have a path from A to B avoiding some U, because the U is between A and B. So by definition, you cannot find a path from A to B avoiding U. So that's that it's a necessary condition, this is clear, it follows from the definition, but this is an if and only if. And you have this kind of result which you need to show. Maybe the next thing I want to show you is that actually this notion of path avoiding a point is actually very useful to give you structural characterization for Robinsonian matrices. So I have shown you combinatorial algorithm to show that the matrix is Robinsonian, and if it is, it constructs some Robinson ordering. Now you may wonder, how do I get a simple certificate that the matrix is not Robinsonian? Of course, you can run the algorithm and trust the algorithm, but it's maybe nicer to have in your hands a proof That's a certificate that the matrix is not Robinsonian. And such a certificate arises from this notion of path avoiding a point. Let's call, if you have 3 points x, y, z, let's call it a weighted asteroidal triple if there is a path from x to y avoiding z, a path from x to z avoiding y, and a path from y to z avoiding x. And now, just a second of thinking, from the definitions, it's clear that if such a triple exists, then the matrix cannot be Robinsonian. Because if you have Robinson ordering, you never can position your 3 points. So if there is a weighted asteroidal triple, the matrix cannot be Robinsonian. And actually, this is a certificate. It's an if and only if. So the matrix is Robinsonian if and only if it doesn't have a weighted asteroidal triple. So this gives you a certificate of non-Robinsonian, which you can easily find because it's very easy to find a weighted asteroidal triple in n cube if some exists. And actually, this implies a known characterization for unit interval graphs. So unit interval graphs are characterized by no asteroidal triple, no induced cycle of length at least 4, and no induced claw of. So you see that this is why I put a weighted over there. So the weighted notion subsumes, in the graph case, these 3 notions altogether. Maybe in the last second, this I want to say. So I showed you that the algorithm in n-1 sweeps terminates, and actually you may wonder maybe you can terminate in 3 sweeps, in 4 sweeps. For a long time we thought we could terminate in 4 sweeps because all the examples we tried would terminate in 4 sweeps, but we could not prove it, and it's not true. You need n-1 sweeps. So here is a class of examples where you need n-1 sweeps. And maybe, computer experiments all done by Matteo, which you can find in his PhD thesis. Maybe I just show you. So in the, this table shows you the comparison of how does a spectral algorithm behave with respect to the SFS algorithm. So for small matrices up to size 1000, spectral is slightly better, but this is a scale in milliseconds, so they are very similar, but spectral slightly better. And for large matrices up to size 10,000, when the matrices are sparse and are not dense, then both algorithms are about the same. But for large matrices and dense matrices, then the SFS algorithm starts to outperform the spectral algorithm. So like in the largest instances, spectral would take like 7 minutes and SFS would take 1 minute. So that's all. I just finished with this a few observations. So we have extensions of LexBFS to matrices, so weighted graphs. I've shown you how you can use it to recognize Robinsonian matrices, but it's a very simple general algorithm, and it would be very nice to come up with other applications of that algorithm. LexBFS is used widely for all kinds of algorithmic tasks, so we hope that SFS can also be used for other algorithmic tasks. And I've explained you that Robinsonian matrices are a matrix or analog of unit interval graphs. Now, any graph property defined by 3 points, you can figure out a matrix analog of it. So there are some meaningful matrix analogs of graph properties. So we started looking, for instance, at what we call chordal matrices, but this is widely open if more can be done there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Questions?
So were the archaeologists happy with?
The archaeologists, we didn't talk to the archaeologists yet.
Were they happy?
Were they happy?
Yes.
I don't know if they are happy. I didn't talk to the archaeologists yet. Robinson is...
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more the difference between, say, the extra properties of an anchor versus sort of the end interval of a unit interval. Because in Corneille's, you might go across, back and forth, and you're finding basically the end intervals of your interval representation. Your anchor seems to be doing the same. When you flip from A to B, you're going across, back and forth.
Yes, yes.
Can you explain sort of what is extra in the anchor, what extra property the anchor has that just the end interval from Corneille doesn't?
So when you mean the end interval, you mean the end interval of the interval representation of the graph?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
sort of finding the rightmost simplicial vertex.
So we don't find an interval representation. Huh? There are no more, I mean.
Right, but virtually that's what you're doing. You're sweeping across to find what would be at the end if you had such a representation. But you don't have that. You don't have such a underlying interval representation in the.
So you kind of have also an underlying interval representation. Because in a sense, as I briefly mentioned, a Robinsonian matrix or Robinson matrix, you can write it as a conic combination of, what you can do is look at all the level graphs of the matrix, and your matrix is Robinson precisely when all these graphs are unit interval graphs. So one way to look at all this is you have a collection of graphs which is monotone, so contained into one another. You have an inclusion-wise collection of graphs. And the question you are asking yourself is, can I find an ordering which respects the three-vertex condition for all the graphs at the same time? This is exactly what this whole thing is about. And so, yeah, so you could from this infer information about the intervals. We didn't look at that actually. How to infer information about the intervals by looking at, but the anchors are what are the end vertices of Robinson ordering, which has a common vertex ordering, if you like, for all the interval graphs at the same time. I'm not sure it answers enough your question, but we have to.
Closer. We have to iterate it n times.
But we can speak more after, if you wish.
Okay, last quick question.
Thank you. Well, first I have the same question as Professor Golombek, and I was thinking about these extreme simplicial vertices, as we call, but anyway, I have another quick question. So, first of all, thank you for the purely combinatorial way. I like that very much. And I was wondering when you talked about applications, because the way, the motivation we had to study this LEX BFS was to solve these very hard and challenging combinatorial problems. So for proper proper interval graphs, we have, for instance, Hamiltonian cycle, and then I just heard that it's solved for Max Cut. Frederic told me yesterday. So Max Cut is now solved for proper interval graphs. And we tried, yes, it's very nice.
It was open. Oh, okay.
Yes, it was open.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
we have some
open.
challenging.
I was not
yes,
aware it's closed.
yes, that have been open
Exactly.
for, I don't know, 30 years or so.
Yeah, indeed.
That David Johnson asked, and they are still there.
Yeah.
And we were hoping for, but as far as I understood, Max Cut is not by using LEX BFS, but maybe now that we know it's polynomial, maybe we can have another algorithm. But how about edge coloring, for instance? We tried, and we have some particular cases, but we cannot do, not yet. So I was wondering about when you said applications, that maybe now we learn more. Yes.
We would be delighted if people would find more application for SFS. It's just a very simple algorithm, extension of LEX BFS. And we found here an application, but we would be delighted indeed if it gets more applications to more problems. Yeah, but I will be very happy to talk after.
Okay, let's thank Monique again.